And look, thank you so much for coming to this early morning session. I hope everyone enjoyed the great dinner that was held last night in the War Memorial Hall. And I think it's particularly pleasing to see so many of you who've got up at this ungodly hour in the morning. First of all, I'll apologise for my voice. One of the delights of having grandchildren is you can give them back. Unfortunately, they don't take their colds with them, so you get stuck with that. What I might do is start off by giving you a bit of an introductory session to this project and program work that IPAA's been doing. We've then got the world premiere of our video on it, more on that later, and then we'll have a discussion session with some audience questions, because I'm very keen, in fact we're all very keen, to get the views, at least of the people here, on some of the things we've been grappling with. Okay. The challenge for all of us, whether or not we think public sector performance is good or fantastic, is how can we make it better? Clearly, for Australia to thrive as an economy, we've got to continue to improve our productivity. If you look at messages in audits review, whether it's Commonwealth, state, or even local government, they all come up with very similar messages: lack of measurable goals, ineffective leadership, poor communications, managing underperformance. And also in there is inadequate skills, knowledge and experience to do the job. Now, they're all important areas that need to be addressed, and different people are addressing them in different ways. But one area that IPAA ACT was particularly interested in, because we are a professional organisation, is the area around the inadequate skills, knowledge and experience to do the job. This has emerged as a theme, I guess, in a number of views, particularly the work done by the UK Civil Service back in the 2006, who called for a step change in the professional skills of public servants. New Zealand's also done some work, I quote here some work done in contracting area, and also a lot of the ANO audits at the Commonwealth level, in different audits, have found skills missing in different, it could be project management in one, procurement in another. But for me, I guess it's also personal. When you get involved in something, you always bring your own baggage. And my baggage is, and I haven't really introduced myself, but you can find my, I suppose, profile with your handset if you're really interested. But I come from a professional background. I trained as a vet, and I did start as a vet working in the New South Wales Public Service. For most of my career, I've actually worked with professionals, whether they've been veterinary surgeons, doctors, nurses, scientists, whatever. And I remember having a real aha moment in one of the organisations that I was actually running at the time, when I was sent a group of people to run a major project for me. And when they came, I realised they knew absolutely nothing about project management. In fact, all they knew was to ring up a consultant and ask how to do it. Now, these were intelligent, clever people. So how come something as basic as running a project, they really had no idea what to do? More recently, I've been doing gateway reviews for the Department of Finance, and these are looking at programs that are being run by major departments, or programs which are about to be run and are going to Cabinet for consideration. Now, consistently, I find the people are excellent. They're enthusiastic, they've got good communication skills, they're dedicated, and they're persistent and ethical. But unbelievably, sometimes these skills really don't know what they need to know to do the actual job that they're needed to do, whether it's develop a program or a regulatory scheme. And I guess that brings you to the big question is, why? Well, I'm into frameworks. If you look at a framework, to do a great job, you need the people, the tools and the processes. Now, people, there are lots of areas that are of interest of people. They need the inherent capacity, the intelligence, basic communication skills. They also need, certainly in the public sector, and I'm sure it's the same in the private, they need the right attitudes and behaviours. And they also need foundation skills. They need to have areas of literacy, communication skills. But what they also need is the competency in actually applying the specific tools and processes. Now, what IPAA ACT started doing in 2011 was to look at this issue. And we found there wasn't a consistent understanding that there's a body of knowledge underpinning the development and use of these processes and tools. And they need the skills, the knowledge, and the practice to apply these tools and process if you're to get high standard work. I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't want to go to a surgeon who's doing his first ankle replacement. I want to go to one who's doing his 1,000th ankle replacement. So why in the public service do we so often tolerate most of the team be doing things for the first time, or at least in some areas we do? Now, if you add together the knowledge and you add together the skills, you actually end up with a profession, and that sits at the basic of profession. The other thing we found when we did a bit of this research in 2011, there was no consistent guidance to the vet sector, the tertiary, educational and training sector, or the tertiary sector about what professional capabilities were required by public servants. When we looked at what was happening overseas, we found that there was an emerging theme around public sector professions. In Canada, they have 18 functional communities, including policy, service delivery and regulators. And what they have there is a relationship between communities which are run within federal agencies. For example, the health department runs the community of regulators, and they sit down and work through with the tertiary sector what the capabilities are and what the courses should be delivering. The APS and various state departments have what they call job profiles and job clusters, but they don't quite take the concept of professionalism, I suppose, as far as we in IPAA are taking it. The UK probably has done the most work. They started their work about 2005 with a recognition that they needed professions. They put out some early work on procurement and program management, and then I guess with the restructuring it went in abeyance for a while. But just recently they've launched their new civil service competency framework. It has 22 professions, public sector professions, and they have or are developing standards for all of them, capability standards, and they also have a designated head of profession. Now, the professions, people say, well, what do you mean? The ones that are most consistently identified, and I'm not including ones like accounting, lawyer, nurses, doctors, which have been well recognised and are obviously within the public service, but the ones that come up are procurement, policy development, program management, service delivery, regulation, project management, and I probably should add HR management into that too. Now, I'm sorry about this slide. If you want to see it in more detail, I think it's on our website somewhere. But in talking about people, we identified that there are a number of potential benefits of having professional standards. And we'll indicate and hopefully illustrate that in our world premiere of our video. But particularly, if you have a capability standard, it can guide you in the recruitment process, in how you specify positions. It can help in workforce planning, workforce mobility. It can help you as an individual to know what are the things you're expected to do if you aspire to be a professional in some area. And I guess another thing that was quite important is I guess it's a bit upsetting if people say, when in answer to the question, what do you do? Oh, I'm just a public servant. We felt, I suppose, particularly from IPAA's perspective, that you should take pride and say, well, I'm a professional public servant and I happen to have a professional expertise in procurement or policy management. So what we did at the end of we did our research, IPAA ACT decided with national endorsement to sponsor a project, and this has been undertaken over this year with the help of, I suppose, many people, including some who are in the room, so I'd like to thank you all very much for that. I won't have the opportunity to thank you all today, but the names of everyone who's been involved in the project are on our website. So the project was to do a number of things. Essentially, it was to test the feasibility, interest and potential value of IPAA developing national professional capability standards against a range of public service professions. I picked two to start with. I picked policy and procurement. I picked them for two reasons. Procurement, in there are already a number of standards that do apply in this sector, more in the private sector. There is reasonably good role clarity about what procurement is. there are quite a number of people who self-identify as procurement professions, and it's fairly easy to identify who might be interested. Policy sat at the other end of that. There's very confused role clarity. Lots of people call themselves policy professionals and they all do totally different things. There's a broad range of people who identified it. At that stage, we couldn't find any capability standards, and it's really hard to identify who in government or outside really has a vested interest in this and is able to contribute in the same way. And there was also a view that it's a very intuitive task, and you can't really define it. It's a bit of a mystery. So we felt they were two ends of the spectrum, and that's exactly the way they proved to be. We established a national steering committee that had people from the federal service, state services, local government, from academia and from private consulting. And we also put a paper up to the Public Service Commissioners in 2013 in April about what we were doing, and they said they were supportive of this project. When I said they supported it, they didn't formally endorse it, but they said, yes, we're very supportive of this project. This basically, again, this is on the website, but this explains how it all glues together in terms that IPAA's looking at, so I've got a loud voice anyway, we're looking at this area here in the Australian Qualifications Framework, which is at the 9 and 10 level, but we accept that in the spaces we're talking about, say for example procurement, there are people who operate at the operative level, at the practitioner level and the professional level, and you can obviously move from one to another. But it was felt important by the steering committee that we show how it all glues together and where IPAA's interest is. So today, what I'd like to further explore is the feasibility, interest and potential value of IPAA's program and to get your feedback on this. Now, to start with, I thought we might show a video of how it might work in practice. I should say this video has been made by volunteers. We're not actors. I think, as I'm one of them, I can say it's fairly apparent. And I don't think we're in line for an Oscar, but hopefully it will give you some indication of how the standards might work in practice.
Hi Sarah, how's it going? I believe you wanted to talk to me about Catherine.
Yeah, that's right. Look, I've got to do her performance discussion next week. I just wanted your advice because I've got a few issues.
Sure, happy to help. I know you're not very happy with her performance. I don't quite understand why she has problems, as she came with excellent references and she seems such a positive person.
Well, that's it. She is really good with other people. The team loves her. She's a great communicator. She gets along well with the team. But it's just, she doesn't really seem to know what policy development means in practice. So she produces the papers I ask of her, but they're just not really up to standard.
I thought she had a policy development role in her previous position.
Well, that's what her job was called, but from what I gather, she actually spent a lot of time talking with consultants, and consultants did most of that work, so she didn't really do a lot of the policy development stuff herself.
Yeah, I suspect that's not unusual these days.
Yeah, look, she's really bright, and I think she has a lot of potential, but she's just not really there yet.
Your policy skills are good. You should teach her.
Well, yes and no. I've thought about what I do in policy and it's really become quite intuitive. So, I know sort of when I need to do research, when I need to talk to stakeholders. It's really difficult to actually put that into a framework and explain it to someone else. So, I've never really done any formal training on that. It's just second nature now, I suppose.
Well, the Institute of Public Administration has just put together a professional policy capability standard, which might be just a sort of starting point you want. They built their outcome standards in the sort of areas one would expect, developing and using a sound evidence base, understanding and managing the political context and planning from the outset for how the policy will be delivered. You could discuss each of these standards with Catherine in a performance review, assess where she is at with each and develop a plan to progressively address each gap.
That's a great idea. I haven't even heard of those standards yet. It's still going to take a while to bring her up to speed.
Sure, but in the meantime it might be worth reassessing what work you give her. She seems very strong on the consultation side, and perhaps you could take some of that with Ben, that Ben's working on, and then bring some of the research that Ben's got over for Catherine.
It's a great idea. I think also the APSC has a couple of courses in policy development. Maybe I should send her along to one of those.
Thanks for coming to see me, Maria. I understand you're here to help me with my recruitment challenge.
Absolutely, Alison. The department's lent me to the new regulatory agency for 3 months to help you get recruitment underway. How's the new position going?
Well, to be honest, it's not really me. I'm quite keen to get back to my legal practice, actually.
Well, how are they going with recruitment of the permanent CEO?
Oh, look, pretty good, I think. They've selected someone and they've got a good regulatory background. And I think it's meant to be going to Cabinet next week. That's confidential, of course.
Yes, of course. Okay, but we'll need more than one person with a regulatory background.
Oh, absolutely, and that's why I was keen to talk to you today. Good regulation requires good regulators, but to be honest, I'm not sure exactly what sort of background we're looking for. For example, would it be better to get someone, say, who's worked at a regulatory agency like IPAA, or would we be better to get someone in who, say, worked in the renewable energy industry?
Well, I suspect that you will need both, someone with specific regulatory skills and a knowledge of the market which they're operating in.
Yeah, look, I'm sure that's right. Look, I thought it might be helpful in drawing up some selection documentation if you went and saw a couple of contacts of mine.
Well, happy to do that. But have you thought of starting with the Institute of Public Administration's professional standards that have been developed?
No, to be honest, I've never even heard of it.
Well, it's a set of standards drawn up by IPAA in consultation with stakeholders to define the specific capabilities required of a regulator. IPAA are designing other capabilities for other government public sector professions, but they're in the early stages of the regulatory professional standards.
But is this IPAA standard relevant to this state or indeed even this industry? For example, I'm not sure that someone, say, who regulates the racing industry in Victoria would really have much in common with what we need to regulate renewables in this state.
Well, there are plenty of people who work as practitioners in the regulatory space, but a professional regulator is able to give strategic guidance on how to design and manage a regulatory scheme, such as how to design compliance and monitoring strategies to achieve the best cost-effective outcomes. We'll need plenty of practitioners, but they're more to implement the scheme rather than design it.
Yeah, look, that sounds great. But what about the capabilities we'd want from a regulatory practitioner?
Well, I know IPAA was looking at doing that, but I'm not sure how far they've advanced. So I don't think it would be a major challenge for us to take the professional standards and remove some of the higher level requirements and add a bit more of the operational side.
Yeah, look, that sounds good. I mean, I wouldn't mind getting both the professionals and practitioners on board pretty quickly.
Look, happy to do that. I'll draw up some draft selection documentation and get back to you. But I think the other thing we need to consider is the public sector leadership framework and the ethical requirements when drawing up the selection documentation.
Will that be a problem? I can't imagine the ethics will be, but what about the leadership capability? Is that likely to have things that are in conflict with what we want from a regulator?
No, I don't think so. Our leadership framework specifies what is wanted in most roles, capabilities such as teamwork, communication skills. Yeah. So our regulatory professional standards would just adding specific skills and knowledge that is required of professional regulators.
Okay, yeah, look, that all makes sense.
Yeah, I was also thinking if you would like me to contact some of your agency contacts and see if they're available for selection panels.
Oh, now that's a good idea. It's always a challenge to get people to sit on that.
So that's what I wanted to talk to you about, actually. I just don't know whether I want to continue with a career in finance. I don't know whether it's something that I really will want to do in the long term.
So yeah, I guess we're all different. Some people are happy to stay in a job for some period of time and others like to change around. One of the great things about public service, as you know, is the opportunity to work in different areas.
What I'm concerned about is the danger that I might be typecast as finance, and whether that's going to limit my ability to get a position in another department, for example.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. It is a concern that some people do take that narrow view, but I think you've got a range of skills that you've developed in your accounting qualifications that will be valuable in other public sector roles. Certainly such roles as program management and procurement build on a range of other disciplines.
Procurement is something that I'm interested in, but I don't see myself, buying weekly stationery.
Yes, I suppose that could get a bit tedious, though. Buying stationery can be a really important aspect of an office functioning. And it's a lot more complex than just buying stationery. If you were buying strategic capabilities like submarines or patrol boats or blood products, say, then a lot of procurement professionals would have a lot to consider in those roles. Things like whole of life issues that could span decades, the environment, managing relationships, trying to obtain really good prices from a small number of suppliers, right down to national security, say. You already have a good background in understanding company viability, cost structures and prices, and how the budget life cycle works, which are all important when you're working in procurement.
But how do I know what skills I'm missing?
Yeah, that's a good question and sometimes very difficult to work out, but fortunately, I suppose, a colleague of mine has been doing some work with the Institute of Public Administration, and they've been developing professional standards and capability standards, and they've developed one around procurement. What it will allow you to do is get an idea of what capabilities a professional in procurement might be required to have, and it then has outcome standards that are based around, for example, contract management and contract negotiation.
That sounds good, but it seems like there's a lot of capabilities I'd need to be a procurement professional.
Yeah. So maybe as a first step you could do a self-assessment against the capabilities and identify what skills you think you need to develop. And there's always opportunities for us to fill those gaps.
I imagine that if I decide ultimately that procurement is for me, there'd be some kind of postgraduate strategic procurement qualifications available across Australia.
Yeah, that's true. And generally government departments do support that type of training, so that's again something that we could look at. And just thinking about it, I've just had another idea. The departments are always looking for someone that has finance expertise to go on tender evaluation panels, and they're running a procurement process at the moment for a survey boat. So if you're interested, we could get you involved.
IPAA is developing capability standards for policy professionals, procurement professionals, and for the professional regulator. These can be used in just these situations to clarify expectations in performance review settings, assist in the recruitment of professionals, and plan for skill and career development. The standards can also complement more strategic initiatives where agencies seek to articulate required capabilities.
That all sounds great. Thanks so much, Richard. It's really been valuable. I think I know what I'm going to do when I get to the meeting now. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Mari. Have a good day.
Thanks, that's a great idea. I'd actually really love to do that. I wouldn't mind maybe giving formal training a break.
For more information and to see which professions are next to be developed, go to www.ipaa.org.au and follow the links.
What we'd like to do now is to, I don't think there's anything more on here, is to move to a panel session, and we have some questions, and I'd like to introduce our panellists. Two of them are mentioned in the conference, so I'll only briefly mention them. That's Kathy Hilyard. Welcome, Kathy. Kathy is the Managing Director of People and Strategy. The other person who's also mentioned is Professor Janine O'Flynn. She's a Professor of Public Management at the University of Melbourne and an adjunct professor at the Australian New Zealand School of Government. I'd also like to welcome to our panel Harry Dunstall. Harry is Deputy Chief Executive Officer of Defence Material Organisation, also General Management of their commercial area. He's got a background in law. He worked as a special counsel in the Australian Government Solicitors Offices and was admitted to the Supreme Court as a solicitor in 1987 and now works for DMO. The other person I'd like to welcome, William Bauer, also from DMO. William is currently Director of Procurement Professionalisation. He's previously managed the Defence Procurement Policy Framework, so as you can understand, an ideal person to work with us, and has also worked in DMO's Maritime Service Division, providing contract advice to major capital equipment procurement projects. He's got qualifications in politics, psychology, communications, education, defence studies, management, procurement and law. That sounds like you need a lot of skills to be a procurement specialist, Willem. And all these people have worked in some capacity with us on this project. So what we might do is start off with a few preliminary questions. So, okay, now, some of you will have done this before. So what we'd like to know is a little bit more about you and your work. So is everyone familiar with how to use the things? The questions will come up and you press the number on your little handset that gives you answers. So we'll do the first one. What is your main form of employment? You have 10 seconds to get excited. Okay, terrific. Second question. If you work in a government entity, what is its size? Wow, okay. Some very big organisations. Okay, next question. Have you been aware, now this is honest, before you got the email from us last week, have you been aware of IPAA's work in developing professional capability standards? Okay. And the next question. What statement, and I'm asked after honesty, what statement best describes your reaction to IPAA's developing professional capabilities? 1, best idea we've had for a while. 2, probably makes sense for us to do it. Not really, their role should be done by someone else, or don't need public sector professional standards. Interesting. I think that's reasonably good support. Okay, terrific. So we might, I might move over and maybe if you could just, am I meant to get text questions on these? Sorry? They just come up on the screen, do they? Okay, terrific. If you want to text any questions in on your thing, you can do it and they should come up on here. I'm on the right screen here? Sorry. Okay, it's frozen. Okay, so I might move over here and put the first question to our panel. Particularly, I suppose, to Kathleen Miller, who's been involved in the development of the standards. It shouldn't be my standard, thank you very much. A key issue to determine the pilot project is the feasibility of developing a well-researched and robust, credible standard. Maybe if Kathy and William could talk a little bit about the process of developing the standards, what were the challenges, and if you think at the end of the day, ultimately we can have a standard that's sufficiently well researched and credible. And there's a mic here, so you'll need to share it amongst yourselves.
Is it on? Oh, yes, it is on. Thanks, Alison. William, I'll just say a few things and I'll hand over to you. I worked on the design group that developed the draft of the policy capability standard, and I think we had some similar challenges probably to the procurement group and also some unique challenges as well. And I would break them down into three categories. The first being one of collaboration and engagement, and that has a couple of dimensions to it. There's a challenge in bringing together the right group of people to in the right numbers with the right sets of insights and the right mix of insights, and then harnessing those different views of the world to produce something. So that was the first challenge for us, I think, in terms of in the smaller group trying to make sure that we had people with the confidence and the backgrounds to help us develop something that would be considered robust. And the second challenge in collaboration and engagement was casting the net wide and really trying to find people who had the time, the will and the interest in contributing to the development of the standards as well. So the whole collaboration engagement kind of challenge is there. And then the second one would be around process and really making sure that there's a robust process in terms of the design, the research base that you're drawing upon. In policy, it was quite challenging, I think, to get agreement even on what were credible source documents and source information that should be fed into the process, and then looking at ensuring that you hadn't omitted important works that had been done that should be part of that discourse. And the third challenge, I think, was in just in the design team process itself of busy people, and probably the best people to contribute to a process like this are the people who have the least amount of time to contribute. And then harnessing inside of the design group, we had quite a mix. We had people representing an academic perspective, we had people with backgrounds in developing capability standards for public service, and we had people who were policy professionals. And we all brought quite a different set of ideas to the table, and we're all very busy. So getting those ideas out, getting them into the mix, feeling confident that we were representing the broader population that has an interest in this. And I found, particularly as the design group co-chair, talking to a lot of the policy professionals, the practitioners in particular, who said, look, I've been doing this all my career, but I don't really think I know what a policy professional really is. So confidence to actually articulate, and I'm not sure whether that's a policy-specific challenge because of the mystery surrounding this world of the policy profession, but that was definitely something about the commitment, the confidence to commit something to paper that people felt they would be willing to put their name to. So there was three challenges, and I think it's interesting to observe that they probably replicate some of the challenges that occur in policy development itself. So, and the last one that I'd say, which I won't talk too much about, is the next step is the challenge of the implementation, integration, and the use of the standards, so it doesn't just become an academic, artificial kind of exercise that doesn't get applied.
Great, thank you very much. Well, I think the great thing about developing these capabilities was it just came at a time where many of the participants in our working group were very much thinking about exactly what our role clarity was at different levels. So we had representatives from local government, from state and territory governments, from the Commonwealth, and also from IPAA. And I think I'll just take a moment to thank those who were in the working group. We had Dr. Geraldine Kennett, IPAA Victoria, Brian O'Mara from the New South Wales local government procurement area, Yvette Sims and KL Drinkwater from Department of Finance, Teresa Scott from the Australasian Procurement and Construction Council, Catriona Vigor from the ACT Government, and Jackie Stefanoff from the Victorian Auditor General's Office. So we all had a kind of different view, I think, relevant to our respective governance frameworks on what a procurement professional should be doing. And I think the challenge for us was to articulate what the essence of what we did was, and to incorporate in such a way that we covered the entire public sector without becoming too complex and using too much jargon. And I think at the end of the day, once we had our structure of the broad procurement life cycle, and we were able to articulate those risk elements which we thought was central to the role of what procurement does, we were able to build our kind of capability standard. And some of the key issues we touched on was contract management, that ultimately to deliver an effective contracting outcome, you needed to have a contract that did what you wanted. So you had to invest a lot of time in planning, going out to the market, making sure you signed the right contract. But then the only way to maintain or deliver greater value was to spend a lot of time actually managing the contract. And we had a big discussion about the fact that some people administer a contract. An invoice comes in, they pay it. And we all agree that that really wasn't the essence of what procurement was about. We wanted to really focus on adding that value and managing that risk. And some of the other issues we touched on was we talked about how often audits in the procurement space talked about the fact that if you didn't know what your performance measures were, how do you know if you actually delivered the procurement outcome? We touched on the importance of ethics and probity, and the fact that as a professional you must lead that to ensure that the process is above board and can stand up to review and audit. And I think we also acknowledged that one of the key things was that we really need to invest across the procurement lifecycle in the knowledge and skills of our staff so that they can effectively deliver the value that we're seeking. So as I mentioned, we sought feedback from the various communities, our members, state and territory representatives across the Commonwealth agencies, and I sent it out to a lot of people in defence and had some very interesting comments, which hopefully we've captured. And I think the important thing, just to reiterate as well, is what we've delivered is like the first draft. I think over time it'll evolve. I think we look forward to input from people who use it and say, what about adding this, or what about this aspect of it that we can create a more robust standard as we go forward. So I'm hoping that this is the beginning of a journey and that we can use this standard as almost like a I don't want to say a war cry because that might not be appropriate, but something, a rallying cry that we can say, look, isn't it great that we can point to a standard that articulates what we care about in procurement to help build the profession, the professional standards and the delivery of procurement value. Thank you.
Thanks, Dylan. We have quite a few questions. I don't know what else to read. I might put one to Harry, which I've lost. How do you see the standards supporting the notion of a generalist, especially at the senior executive service level? I picked you because you're our SES rep here today.
That's all right. It's a really good question, and one, in fact, I was having a discussion on Monday night at a kind of a leadership think tank, I guess you'd call it, on this exact issue. I think one of the challenges for people who get into the SES is often you get into the SES because you are in fact an expert in something. But as you get into the SES, you need to push that expertise, or that expertise then needs to be being performed by others, and you become much more in the leadership and the manager role. And I think how one of the big features of the procurement capability standards that we looked at was the specific recognition of a procurement delegate as one of the standards. And this is really most likely people who are in the SES who have to be the ones who actually exercise a delegation to say, yes, we're going to spend $1 million or $10 million or $100 million. So the key for this standard was that there is an expectation that those people who do become more generalist and leave the expertise to others will engage with the expert, but will have a good understanding of the governance arrangements, the legal and accountability frameworks that operate under the Financial Management Accountability Act in our case, or soon to be the Public Governance Performance and Accountability Act. and have the ability to engage the expertise they need to make good procurement decisions. So that was actually a conscious decision in our space. So the procurement standards, I'm talking procurement as opposed to policy because it's something that's dear to my heart, was important because we had a lot of people, certainly in our organisation across the public sector, engaging in procurement at a range of different levels. And what was important to us was to have a better understanding of the capabilities that are required to effectively execute that procurement at the various levels, including up at the SES level, when you have people taking responsibility for spending significant amounts of taxpayers' dollars, but who perhaps didn't have the expertise or indeed the frameworks in which to make those decisions as well as they should. Is that a sufficient question?
I might put one to Janine before we go to your audience question. The question is, do you see these standards being used to standardise tertiary qualifications?
My boss is not in the room today, so I can speak pretty freely. I think they can help to shape educational offerings. One of the things that we continually debate in the higher education sector is, who are the graduates that we produce? What are the attributes of those graduates, and how does that match the demands of the occupations that they go into? And this debate, of course, never ends because it's about what is the role of a university and what sort of generic skills are we trying to develop in our students that they can then apply into different professions. And so I think that's a debate that will never end. But I work almost exclusively now in postgraduate education with professionals. So it's very important for us to be thinking about what are the professional standards that our industry is developing, how can we work them into our curriculum, how do we develop that in our students so that when they're coming to us as sort of mid-career professionals to really career shift or to develop in that world, are we talking to the skills that they need? And so for us, I think it's actually really useful to understand that. I don't think you're going to see a homogenisation of higher education for many reasons. One is that just the clusters of people that are working in those universities have different specialisations, but they all have a niche market. And so, but working with our industries helps us, I think, to develop a better product. There's no doubt about that.
Thank you, Janine. I'll answer one quickly and then we might go to some audience. There's a couple of questions about how they would fit with APS capabilities and job families. And the idea is that they will absolutely integrate. We've involved the Public Service Commission in that. We've involved the Public Service Commissioner in fact, the Deputy Public Service Commissioner is on the steering committee. So the goal is that whatever we produce is going to be compatible with integrated leadership frameworks, job families that are produced in the Commonwealth of States, and also with terms of work level standards. So we're particularly going at the AQF 9 level, but how an agency actually integrates that within, it's up to them. We wouldn't be prescriptive about that. Our goal is to add value and help them do that rather than tell them how to do that. So we might go to some more audience questions. So the next question, now you know a little bit more about them, do you actually think you'd use them? So the first one is, if your organisation undertakes policy development or procurement, would you use any of the applicable standards once finalised? There are your options. You have 10 seconds starting now. That's very encouraging. Okay, next question. Now, would you, and I want absolute honesty, this is not, the public service where you'll be sacked if you don't give the right answer. Would you honestly use any of the standards yourself? In any capacity, whether it's recruitment, whatever role? Again, that's an encouraging answer. Okay, we might go to another panel question. I guess you can develop good standards, but one of the key questions is about actually how you integrate them and use them, and Kathy alluded to that in the end of her presentation, and we have had a couple of questions about adoption and how that might happen. What do you see as the challenges and issues we need to confront that? So I'll open that to anyone. Yeah, Janine, do you want to kick off? Thanks.
I mean, I've been working for the last couple of years with the Public Service Commission on a project on developing a new framework for performance management across the APS. And what's been fascinating for the team that who have been doing that, both from the Commission and from 3 different universities, has been this question of sort of when we have all of these very well-designed systems, why aren't we ever using them? And for us, we got to the end of that sort of project and said, what we don't need is a whole bunch of new systems and tweaking and developing those. But what we need to do is really think about how do we make them meaningful and useful and valuable so that people will just see them as part of their role as managers. And for us, one of the big things that came out of that project was really about professionalising management in the public service. And I think it goes back to the question of sort of generalists in that system or technical experts and what happens when they have to take on major managerial and leadership roles. And so for me, something like this has the risk of that. But if we can, from the start, make it meaningful, help managers to be able to do things like performance management, to design jobs, to really make that something that helps them in the craft of management, I think we're onto something very useful indeed. So that would be my sort of tip: meaningful, useful, valuable, because a lot of those things are seen as something that's not my core job. That was something we heard over and over again. Performance management is not my actual job, it's something extra to my job. And this came from people at the highest levels, in departments across the APS. It was something extra that you did rather than something that was core to that process. So, yeah.
Yes. Having been so closely involved with this development, I've been thinking about how we can use it just within our Defence Department. And I think the critical thing is that we often talk about what type of dedicated training courses should we develop that no one else is going to be involved in that meets our unique needs. So this gives us now a basis for like our training needs analysis. We can say, well, these courses are generic, they're available from vocational organisations, universities, professional bodies, but the things that we need that are not covered by those generic courses that we need to develop within Defence, we have a clearer idea of a framework, what might be missing and what we may need to focus on. And we just recently conducted a very small training needs analysis, and one of the interesting outcomes was that a lot of our foundation courses that we run are no longer in demand because staff turnover is very low now, and those people have done those courses already. What they're looking for are the more sophisticated courses that are directly aligned to adding value, saving money, creating a more efficient approach, delivering the capability. So I think now that we have this framework, I can sit there and say, look, these are the clear gaps in my system that we should be focused on. I can work with educational providers to say, well, these are generic across procurement. Why don't you focus on delivering those, and then I can turn my attention to those unique requirements specific to Defence. Thank you.
I think there's also a structural issue here, and I think one of the opportunities that IPAA, being the party that's developing these standards, gives us is that we don't have to be wedded to a particular jurisdiction in terms of standards. So when we're thinking about national consistency and we're talking about interjurisdictional arrangements, IPAA is a body that can look at what's going on in local, state and at the federal level as well, and try and build frameworks that draw upon all of those experiences as well as add value at the 3 different levels. So I think there are some structural integration issues here that probably needs some further work in terms of thinking about, in the UK, for example, they have developed professional leads, so they have heads of profession who are responsible for looking at these gaps and capability, strengths and so on across the profession, across the service. So I think there are some other mechanisms potentially beyond just developing the standards themselves that help each of the layers of government integrate these ideas.
I'll just make a comment on a couple of questions. There's been a couple of questions about are they applicable to small agencies, to states, to different jurisdictions. The answer is yes, they're meant to be applicable to all contexts. Having run small agents, you can bet your bottom dollar they're applicable to small agencies too. I guess the difference is in a small agency, your need, or I suppose your opportunity to have someone who's a specialist professional in one area, you may not have the staff numbers to justify that, but there are still capabilities that you can pick out that you will want the people who do that as part of their work to actually do. And we have involved the states. We'd like to, obviously, if we keep going, involve them much more, but the standards should be applicable in different jurisdictional contexts. So we might just go to the next two questions, which is about how we get comments on the standards, because as Kathy and Willem have alluded to, one of the challenges is getting meaningful engagements on it. So if we publish a draft standard, and I should point they've both been up the web since Tuesday, and you have some expertise and we ask people for comments, would you actually provide them? Okay, that's encouraging. There's some people who want to contribute. Okay, the next question. Okay, so how do we get your comments? I'll let you read them. My challenge will be to remember the answers when the things come up. Okay, confidence in public service commissioners there. But interestingly, we're thinking a workshop might be the better way to go for some of them to do. Okay, I might do the next couple of questions. In designing them, I guess it's most helpful if we know how people are most likely to use them. So in which sort of situation are you most likely to use the standards? I think William was a 4, aren't you, William? Well, this is your first choice. You get 2 goes at this. So this is your first choice about how you'd use them. Yeah, pretty, okay. But probably personal development, career planning, slightly ahead of training. Okay, now you get to do it again, the next slide, your second choice. Question 10. Okay, so pretty similar second choice too. Yeah. Okay, I might do the next 2 questions and then we might go to some of the audience questions here. What do you see as the priorities? Like if we keep going, we've already done, or nearly finished, at least the first versions, the procurement and the policy professional. What do you see as, and you get 2 goes at this too, what do you see as the next one that IPA should invest in? Oh, that's very interesting. Well, now you get another go at that. It'll be interesting to see if that's the same. Okay. Very interesting. Neck and neck there. Terrific. Thanks for that. We might now go to another question, which is that there seems to be an art, and I guess we've mentioned it, in getting standards that actually add value. What are the bit that IPA needs to get right if we are to get these standards used, developed well, and adopted and actually used in practice, and adding value, because there's no point getting them used if they're not adding value. Someone like to take that one?
You're looking at me. I'll have a go. One of the things, and I think Willem's touched on it a little bit with the procurement space, is the need to integrate all the activities that are going on in the procurement area and have a consistent framework. Particularly mapping it to job families is really critical. So we've done a lot of work in defence on job families, and now we know that the APSC's also got a job families activity. So we need to align the standards with our job families work, which really we only started about 5 years ago. We also need to integrate the standards into the work that the APCC, the Australian Procurement and Construction Council, is doing, which is procurement professionalisation across the various state and Commonwealth governments, and also with CIPSA, which is the professional body that we're trying to also align with, which is Chartered Institute of Purchasing Supply Australasia, which is based on the CIPS UK model. And then also align all the education and training activities that we have to also support the standards. So the standards probably provide the framework that everything else needs to then integrate with. So trying to align all those moving parts, I think, is going to be the key issue for IPA. I'm not sure how you can do that, but that will be, I mean, I think with us continue to be engaged in it, that was a real reason why we came on board so quickly with the IPA activity, was to try and ensure that it was all made as consistent as possible.
I just might pick up on the point that Janine was making around the performance management observations from your work, Janine. I think there's some practical challenges around helping managers and leaders across the board in one, recognising that a capability standard might help you to set expectations and clarify career opportunities and development opportunities for your staff. And if you're not doing performance management, then that's going to be a bit of a challenge if we think that's an add-on to our job. So there's a very practical challenge about human behaviour and in particular management and leadership behaviour. And then there's the practical challenge of making people aware that these tools exist and that they can be used in those contexts. And then there's, I think, a departmental or service-wide kind of challenge about recognising and promulgating and articulating how these fit with those types of, day-to-day management practices. So there's a little bit of work to be done, I think, to bring them to life.
Okay, thanks. One of the questions, one of the things that defines a profession is peer assessment through professional bodies. What will be set up for this? Now, I guess there's no answer to that, but I'd certainly appreciate people's thoughts on where we might move in that area. Janine?
As part of the project we were doing with the Commission, we spent some time in Canada last year, and one of the things that struck me about the way that the Canadian public service works is that they have developed in some areas these very sophisticated communities of practice, and they rely a lot on their peers for management development and really to help people develop as professional managers. And so being able to, I think, create that environment, IPA has a huge comparative advantage in being able to facilitate that. I think we can bring those groups together to really be helping each other to develop professionally as managers and leaders. And they've got the networks there, the peer networks are already there to be able to, I think, operationalise something like that. It was incredibly impressive in Canada, where they relied in many of those areas on their peers to be leading workshops and so on particular topics rather than external consultants. They've got the expertise, but they've now developed a preference for leveraging the internal expertise they have to help their managers and leaders develop. And I thought it was incredibly impressive. So.
It's interesting that we've been talking about how we can develop our skills. Within Defence, we have something called the Procurement Career Life Cycle, which is, in a sense, saying to someone that when you think about a training course, you should really be thinking about professionalising across your entire career. And because of this 70-20-10 model that seems to have made its way into our world, increasingly we're talking about informal skilling, about on the job or through others. as well as formal skilling. And we're just in the process of drafting our procurement professionalisation roadmap within Defence, which is like a how-to guide for people in procurement to think about how they can develop their knowledge and skills across their career. And it's very much about saying, well, don't just think about doing an individual course. Think about using every resource around you, look at the vocational qualifications, look at the range of postgraduate strategic procurement qualifications that are being established across the country, and look at the professional standards, both internationally and within Australia, that you might like to aspire to at some point across your career, and have a complete kind of holistic approach to understanding what your job requires today, what it may require tomorrow, but across your entire career. So I'm hoping that the IPAA standards and our job family framework within Defence, and that this roadmap guidance will give people some tools to think about these things in a way they haven't done so, to ultimately deliver value both for their professional life and for the organisation that employs them.
Thank you, Willem. There was a question here about to what extent will they align with the UK standards, and I guess the answer is we certainly will use the UK standards when we're developing our own, we're looking at them. Some things will be highly relevant and some things I guess will contextualise to Australia. We might move to the next two questions, which is if we continue the project, I guess, and I suppose it leads into this concept of developing professional networks. What further value do you think IPAA could add in this space? So we'll go to question 13. And there have been some questions around some of this. And again, you have two choices here, a first choice and a second choice. Okay, that's interesting. I should point out that already I think some of that facilitating communities practice is starting to happen. Certainly in ACT we've had a program evaluation community of practice which is now part of IPAA. Geraldine Kennett in Victoria is doing some work around communities of practice, and I'm sure some of the other IPAA offices are getting involved in that. And of course within government too there are developing communities of practice. So I guess there's if you like, there's a movement in that direction. Okay, maybe your second choice? Yeah, okay, thank you. That's very interesting. One of the questions to add is what do you see might be the outcome of us? We're trying to develop these standards to meet three jurisdictions, the Commonwealth, the states, territories and the local government. I guess what outcome do you think might we get from actually having this scope of how we're trying to do that? Someone want to take that? Kathy? Oh.
One of the key outcomes of this that I'd like to see is just a better understanding and a better consistency of approach in terms of, well, taking procurement. One of the challenges we have in our organisation when we seek to engage people is it's very unclear based on their CV and resume and even through the interview process just how good a procurement professional they might be. Having these professional standards I think allows a greater transportability across public sector domains and indeed in between the public and the private sectors. And we should be able to have a much better understanding of a particular individual's capabilities if we can map it to the professional standards and we're all working to the same professional capability standards. And I see that as being a significant benefit of having a uniform set of professional capability standards.
I'll just say one thing. I think we've been talking a lot at IPAA in the ACT about this notion of pride in profession, and that being quite a significant role for IPAA to play. And I think this is an interesting area. If we just take policy, the notion of articulating a profession and being able to articulate what that means to be a professional in that arena has a whole lot of flow-on benefits potentially for attracting professionals in those areas, for building up the policy capability across the different sectors and so on, and for being able to much more clearly articulate what we're looking for, rather than being able to maybe identify after the fact what we didn't have. So I think it might help us with some proactive development of these notions of professions within the service, and I think that's a good thing.
Okay. Thanks, Kathy. I'm going to finish this very promptly so you can all get to the next session, but I'd just like to make a few comments first. In regard to the website, we have everything for, I suppose, to be pragmatic, we've listed everything on the ACT IPA the ACT IPA website. If you scroll down the left-hand side, there's a tab called Professional Capabilities, and under there we've got the standards, the framework, the templates, and all the other information, including everyone who's participated. There should be links from the national and other state IPA websites, but some of them may not be there at this stage. So if you are having any problems finding it, go straight to the IPA website. We also are very keen to get feedback input. There's a number of ways that you can do that. We have an email address, which I had on earlier slides, that's also on the website. We also have some forms which we'll leave at the back of the thing if you're interested in doing anything. An alternative is to leave your information there. And we also we've just printed 20 copies of both of the two standards that we've currently produced, one on the procurement. So if you want to grab a hard copy, there's some copies there. Before I thank our speakers, does any of you want to make any particular comments? No? If not, look, I'd really like to thank our speakers, not only for their contribution today, but their contribution during the year, and also a number of other people. I'm looking here at Kale and Christine and Geraldine, a number of people who've put a huge amount of time, not only in today but into the project in general. We've had huge goodwill, and particularly DMO's put in a huge amount of time, and Kathy, who's meant to be running a company, I don't know how she has time to fit in the work for us, but we've really appreciated that. And thank you, Janine, also for your contribution to down the project. We're very interested if you feel there's a question. I've tried to cover most of them, but if you feel a specific question, please send us an email and we'll get back to you. And if not, enjoy the rest of the conference, and thank you very much for your participation and attendance today. Thank you.